Before we begin, subscribe if you're drawn to the darkest mysteries ever recorded. Like the video if stories that make absolutely no sense keep you awake at night. And if you think you can figure out what really happened here, leave your theory in the comments. Because this case has confused investigators, journalists, and millions of people for more than 2 decades. On the evening of February 9, 2004, a quiet road in rural New Hampshire became the center of one of the most chilling disappearances in American history. The road was called Wild Ammonoosuc Road, near the small town of Woodsville, New Hampshire. It was cold that night, the kind of cold that cuts through jackets and turns breath into fog. Snow covered the ground in thick layers, and the forest surrounding the road stretched endlessly into darkness. Around 7:30 p.m., a black Saturn sedan suddenly slid off the icy pavement and crashed into a snowbank along a sharp curve. Inside that car was 21-year-old college student Maura Murray. Maura had been studying nursing at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. By most accounts, she was intelligent, athletic, and driven. She had grown up in a tight-knit family in Massachusetts and had excelled in sports throughout high school. Friends described her as determined and disciplined, someone who rarely made reckless decisions. But in the days leading up to February 9th, something in Maura's life had begun to unravel. Just days earlier, she had received a phone call while working a late-night security shift at her university job. Witnesses later reported that she appeared suddenly distressed. When a supervisor asked what was wrong, Maura simply said, "My sister." She refused to elaborate. The next morning, she began making unusual decisions. Maura emailed her professors, claiming there had been a death in her family and that she would be away from campus for a week. There was no death. Then she searched online for directions to northern New Hampshire and Vermont, areas known for their remote mountains and ski resorts. She also called several hotels in the region, asking about room availability. Later that day, Maura withdrew nearly all the money from her bank account, about $280. She then went to a liquor store and purchased alcohol, vodka, Kahlua, Bailey's, and a box of Franzia wine. No one knows exactly why. By the afternoon, she packed some belongings into her black Saturn and left campus without telling anyone where she was going. The drive from Amherst, Massachusetts to the White Mountains of New Hampshire takes several hours. It winds through quiet highways and small towns where streetlights grow sparse and forests begin to dominate the landscape. At some point during that journey, something went terribly wrong. When Maura's Saturn crashed into the snowbank that night, the impact wasn't severe enough to cause serious injury. But it did attract attention. A local resident named Butch Atwood was driving a school bus home from work when he noticed the crashed car. Atwood stopped and approached the vehicle. Inside, he saw a young woman who appeared shaken but conscious. He asked if she needed help. According to Atwood, Maura declined. She told him she had already called roadside assistance. But that statement was strange because in 2004 there was no reliable cell service on that remote stretch of road. Atwood offered to call the police for her. Maura insisted that he didn't. Still concerned, Atwood returned to his nearby home and called authorities anyway. He reported a single vehicle crash and said the driver appeared to be a young woman who might need assistance. The call was logged at 7:43 p.m. Police were dispatched immediately. But when the first officer arrived at the crash scene just minutes later, something impossible had happened. Maura Murray was gone. Her car sat abandoned in the snow, its hazard lights blinking in the darkness. The driver's door was locked. Inside the vehicle, police discovered several strange details. The windshield was cracked. The airbags had deployed. There were wine stains on the car ceiling and interior. A box of Franzia wine had clearly been opened, and red liquid splattered across the upholstery. Investigators also found Maura's belongings still inside the car. Her cell phone, her debit card, her driver's license, even some of the alcohol she had purchased earlier that day. But the most unsettling discovery was what they didn't find. There were no footprints leading away from the vehicle. The snow surrounding the crash site appeared almost undisturbed. It was as if Maura had simply vanished into thin air. Within hours, local police began searching the area. Officers combed the roadside and nearby woods using flashlights and later brought in tracking dogs. The dogs followed Maura scent briefly down the road, then suddenly lost it. Right in the middle of the pavement. That detail has haunted investigators ever since. Because when a scent trail disappears abruptly on a road, it often suggests one terrifying possibility. A passing vehicle. Someone could have stopped. Someone could have picked her up. Or someone could have forced her into a car. But no one saw anything. The road that night was quiet, and the few residents nearby reported nothing unusual beyond the crash itself. As the hours passed, the mystery deepened. Where had Maura been going? Why had she withdrawn all her money? Why had she lied about a family death? And most importantly, what happened during the 7 minutes between the bus driver leaving the scene and the police arriving? 7 minutes. That was the window of time when Maura Murray disappeared. And in the 20 years since that winter night in New Hampshire, no one has ever been able to explain what happened during those 7 minutes. By the morning of February 10, 2004, the quiet mountain region of New Hampshire had transformed into the center of a rapidly growing mystery. Police from nearby towns began arriving near the crash site along Wild Ammonoosuc Road in Woodsville, New Hampshire. What had started as a routine response to a single-car accident was quickly turning into something far more serious. The young woman who had been behind the wheel, Maura Murray, was nowhere to be found. At first, investigators considered a simple explanation. Perhaps she had panicked after crashing the car and fled the scene, possibly fearing trouble with the police. There were signs that alcohol had been inside the vehicle, and a driver who had been drinking might choose to disappear rather than face a possible DUI charge. But as the hours passed, that explanation began to feel less convincing. Temperatures that night had dropped well below freezing. Snow covered the forest surrounding the road, and the terrain quickly became rough and steep beyond the roadside. If Maura had tried to run into the woods, she would have left clear footprints in the fresh snow. Search teams saw none. Later that day, authorities launched a larger search effort involving officers, volunteers, and tracking dogs. Helicopters flew overhead, scanning the dense forest that surrounded the winding road. The dogs were given a scent from one of Maura's personal belongings recovered from the car. They quickly picked up her trail. The scent followed the road eastward for roughly 100 yards. Then suddenly it stopped, right in the middle of the pavement. Investigators immediately recognized the troubling implication. When a scent trail ends abruptly on a roadway, it often means the person entered a vehicle. Someone may have stopped. Someone may have offered help. Or someone may have taken her. But there were problems with that theory too. The road was quiet that night. Only a handful of cars had passed through the area around the time of the crash. Police interviewed nearby residents, hoping someone had seen a suspicious vehicle or stranger. No one reported anything unusual. One of the most important witnesses remained Butch Atwood, the school bus driver who had spoken with Maura moments after the crash. Atwood lived only a short distance from where the Saturn had hit the snowbank. He told investigators that when he approached the car, Maura appeared shaken but not seriously injured. She seemed calm. But there was something slightly strange about the interaction. Atwood said Maura refused help almost immediately. When he offered to call the police, she insisted she had already called roadside assistance. That statement didn't make sense. Cell service in that part of New Hampshire was extremely unreliable in 2004, especially on a rural road surrounded by mountains. Investigators checked Maura's phone records. There was no call made for roadside assistance. That meant she had either been mistaken, or she had deliberately lied. As police continued searching the area, Maura's family was still unaware that anything had happened. Back in Massachusetts, her father, Fred Murray, believed his daughter was attending classes at the University of Massachusetts Amherst as usual. But when Maura failed to return calls and didn't show up for scheduled commitments, concern began to grow. Soon, campus officials informed Fred that Maura had emailed professors claiming she needed a week off because of a death in the family. Fred was shocked. There had been no death. Then came the call from police in New Hampshire. Fred drove north immediately, arriving at the crash site where his daughter's car had been found abandoned. Standing beside the damaged Saturn in the freezing mountain air, he tried to understand what had happened. Inside the car were several personal items that Maura almost certainly would not have left behind voluntarily. Her phone, her wallet, her birth control pills, even homework assignments and textbooks. To Fred, the scene felt wrong. It didn't look like someone who planned to disappear. It looked like someone who expected to return. Meanwhile, investigators began digging deeper into the days leading up to the crash. What they discovered only added to the confusion. Just days before leaving campus, Maura had been involved in another car accident in Massachusetts while driving her father's vehicle. The crash had caused significant damage. Although no one was injured, the incident appeared to have shaken her. Then there was another troubling detail. A few days earlier, Maura had been caught using a stolen credit card number to order food from a restaurant near campus. She had been confronted by university authorities and faced potential disciplinary action. The situation may have caused significant stress. To investigators, it appeared that multiple pressures had been building in Maura's life at the same time. Academic responsibilities, legal trouble, financial concerns, and the mysterious phone call that had left her visibly upset during her night shift. Whatever had been happening in her life, something had pushed her to suddenly leave campus, withdraw her money, and drive hundreds of miles toward the remote mountains of New Hampshire. But that still didn't explain what happened after the crash. As search efforts intensified, investigators considered the possibility that Maura had succumbed to the elements. Hypothermia can cause confusion and irrational behavior. A person suffering from it might wander into the woods and collapse. But again, there were no footprints, no broken branches, no sign that anyone had moved through the snow-covered forest. Days passed, then weeks. The massive search produced nothing. No clothing, no belongings, no trace of Maura Murray anywhere in the mountains. It was as if she had stepped off that road and disappeared from the world. For her family, the waiting became unbearable. Fred Murray returned to New Hampshire repeatedly, organizing his own searches and speaking with investigators. Volunteers combed miles of forest, hoping to find even the smallest clue. But every search ended the same way. Empty. Meanwhile, speculation about the case began spreading across the country. Some believed Maura had intentionally disappeared to start a new life. Others suspected she had been abducted by someone passing through the area. And a darker theory began to emerge. What if the person responsible for her disappearance lived nearby? Because the terrifying truth about that quiet road in Woodsville, New Hampshire was this. Within minutes of the crash, someone could have approached that stranded car in the darkness. Someone who knew the area. Someone who knew the road. Someone who knew exactly how isolated it was. And if that person had bad intentions, Maura Murray may never have had a chance. As the weeks turned into months, the disappearance of Maura Murray began to attract national attention. What had started as a missing person case in a quiet corner of New Hampshire slowly transformed into one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in modern American history. Investigators returned again and again to the same chilling question. What happened during those 7 minutes? 7 minutes separated the moment when bus driver Butch Atwood left the crash site and the moment police arrived. 7 minutes during which Maura Murray vanished from a dark rural road without leaving a single trace behind. For detectives, those missing minutes became the key to everything. One possibility remained that Maura had simply fled the scene on foot. Perhaps she feared being arrested for driving under the influence. The open container of wine found in the car suggested alcohol may have been involved. A frightened college student might run into the darkness hoping to avoid police. But search teams had already scoured the surrounding forest. Helicopters had flown overhead. Tracking dogs had followed her scent. And the snow told a story that investigators could not ignore. There were no footprints leading into the woods. In winter conditions like that, any movement through deep snow would have left a clear trail. Yet the snow remained undisturbed. That left a far more unsettling possibility. Someone picked her up. The road where Maura crashed was quiet, but not completely deserted. A handful of vehicles had passed through the area that night. Detectives spent months tracking down potential witnesses and drivers who might have been in the area around the time of the crash. None of them reported seeing a young woman walking along the road. None admitted to stopping. Still, the scent trail discovered by the tracking dogs continued to haunt investigators. The trail followed the road briefly before ending abruptly on the pavement. To experienced handlers, that kind of ending often suggests one thing: a person entering a vehicle. If Maura had accepted a ride from someone passing by, that decision may have sealed her fate. But investigators also began exploring darker theories. The region around Woodsville, New Hampshire is rural, with scattered homes and long stretches of forest between them. Some wondered whether a local resident might have seen the crashed car and approached before police arrived. In an isolated area, even a brief encounter with the wrong person could turn deadly. Over the years, rumors circulated about suspicious individuals living near the crash site. Some locals were questioned repeatedly. Certain houses in the area became the focus of intense speculation among online investigators and true crime communities. But speculation never turned into proof. The case remained painfully stalled. Meanwhile, Maura's family refused to stop searching. Her father, Fred Murray, became one of the most determined voices in the search for answers. He returned to New Hampshire again and again, organizing volunteer searches and pushing investigators to keep the case active. Year after year, he walked the same roads and forests where his daughter had last been seen. He spoke with residents. He knocked on doors. He followed leads that often led nowhere. For the Murray family, the lack of answers was its own kind of nightmare. Without evidence of what happened, every possibility remained open. Did Maura run away? Did she suffer an accident in the wilderness that searchers somehow missed? Or did someone take advantage of a stranded young woman on a dark mountain road? As the years passed, new technologies gave investigators fresh tools. In 2006, authorities conducted another major search of the area using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. They focused on nearby properties, fields, and wooded areas where a body might have been concealed. Once again, nothing was found. Later, advances in digital analysis allowed investigators to revisit Maura's phone records and computer activity. They examined emails, internet searches, and financial transactions hoping to uncover clues about her state of mind before she left campus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Her searches for directions to northern New Hampshire suggested she had intentionally chosen the remote White Mountains as her destination. But why? Some believed she simply wanted time alone. Others suspected she may have been planning to meet someone. That theory raised an even darker possibility. If Maura had arranged to meet someone in the area, that person might have arrived shortly after the crash. And that person might know exactly what happened next. But again, no evidence ever confirmed such a meeting. In 2018, investigators conducted another search near the crash site after receiving a new tip. Cadaver dogs examined the basement of a nearby house that had once been occupied around the time of Maura's disappearance. For a brief moment, hope returned that the mystery might finally be solved. But the search produced no definitive evidence. The trail went cold once again. Today, more than 2 decades after that winter night in New Hampshire, the disappearance of Maura Murray remains unsolved. No confirmed sightings. No body. No arrests. Only questions. Somewhere along a dark road in the White Mountains, a young woman stepped out of her crashed car and vanished. And despite thousands of hours of investigation, hundreds of searches, and millions of people following the case around the world, no one has ever been able to say with certainty what happened during those 7 minutes. 7 minutes of darkness. 7 minutes of silence. 7 minutes that erased Maura Murray from the world and left behind one of the most haunting mysteries in true crime history.